There's a specific feeling most homeowners know, but almost nobody names out loud. The mortgage is paid, the lights are on, the fridge has food, and somehow, with a decent salary and a house that looks like success from the outside, there is never quite enough left at the end of the month to actually get ahead. Not broke, not in crisis, just perpetually stretched, just perpetually one unexpected bill away from a credit card balance that doesn't fully disappear. That feeling has a name: house poor. And according to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies 2024 report, approximately 30% of American homeowners are spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, nearly 1 in 3. This video is about why that happens, not because people are irresponsible, not because they bought too much house on purpose, but because the system they used to decide what they could afford was designed to get them into a mortgage, not to protect what comes after.
House poor is not a statistic. It's an emotional state, a feeling of being constantly under financial pressure despite seemingly having achieved the American dream of homeownership. It is the silent agreement to forego everything else for the sake of the property. House poor doesn't happen at closing. Nobody signs the papers and immediately feels the walls close in. It happens gradually, in the months after move-in, when the first property tax bill arrives and it is higher than the estimate, when the homeowner's insurance renews at a new rate, when the deferred maintenance the inspector flagged becomes urgent, when the room that was going to become a home office needs flooring first, when the lawn needs equipment, when the neighborhood requires a level of lifestyle spending that the apartment never did. The Federal Reserve's 2023 survey of consumer finances found that the median American homeowner has a net worth of $396,200 compared to $10,400 for renters. That number is cited constantly as proof that buying a home builds wealth. What it does not show is the composition of that wealth. For the majority of middle-income homeowners, the overwhelming share of that net worth is home equity, an illiquid asset they cannot spend, cannot invest, and cannot access without taking on new debt. According to the same Federal Reserve data, the median homeowner outside their home equity has liquid and investable assets of approximately $40,000 to $60,000. The house looks like wealth from the outside. The bank account tells a different story. That gap between the net worth number and the actual financial freedom is where house poor lives. Meet Lauren. She earns $85,000 per year. She rented for 6 years, saved $65,000, and bought a $325,000 home in 2023. She put 20% down. She did everything right by the conventional standards. Her mortgage payment on $260,000 at 6.7% for 30 years is $1,686 per month. That is the number she budgeted around. That is the number the bank discussed. That is the number on her approval letter. Here is the number she actually pays every month. Property taxes in her county at 1.3% of assessed value, $352 per month. According to the Tax Foundation's 2024 property tax data, the national average effective rate is 1.1%, but buyers frequently underestimate this figure at purchase because they calculate against the purchase price rather than the likely reassessed value after sale. Homeowners insurance at current national average per the Insurance Information Institute 2024 report, $160 per month. Her premium increased 18% at the first renewal. Climate-related insurance market stress is pushing premiums upward in most U.S. markets, regardless of whether a specific homeowner has made a claim. Maintenance reserve at 1% of home value annually per Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies guidance, $271 per month. Lauren does not keep this reserve formally. She spends it reactively. Year 2 brought a $3,200 plumbing issue. Year 3 brought $1,800 in fence repair after a storm. Year 4 will bring something else. Her real monthly housing cost is $2,469 against her gross monthly income of $7,083. That is 34.9% of gross. Against her take-home pay after taxes of approximately $5,300, that is 46.6% of actual spending money. Lauren is not in a $600,000 home she cannot afford. She is in a $325,000 home she bought responsibly, and she is still house poor because the full cost of ownership was never assembled in one place before she signed. After housing, Lauren has $2,831 per month for everything else: transportation, groceries, utilities, health costs, subscriptions, debt payments, and the portion of her income that should be building her financial future. There's not enough room in $2,831 to do all of those things adequately. Something gets cut. Usually, it is retirement contributions above the minimum or the emergency fund that stops growing at $8,000 and never gets to 6 months of expenses.
Trap 1. The lifestyle expansion that comes with the house. Apartments have built-in limits. A 900 square foot apartment cannot accumulate much furniture. There is no garage, there is no basement, there is no yard requiring equipment. A home removes those limits, and with more space comes more spending. Often so gradually it never registers as a decision. New furniture for rooms that were empty, a lawnmower, a snowblower, a grill, holiday decorations that the apartment never needed, window treatments, a patio set, a second car because the neighborhood's walkability is lower than the old one. A study published in the Consumer Research Journal found that home size directly correlates with consumption. Larger living space consistently predicts higher spending on durable goods in the years following purchase, independent of income. This is not a character flaw. It is a predictable behavioral response to new space, but it compounds an already tight budget without ever appearing on the affordability calculator. Trap 2. The sunk cost of the down payment. Lauren put $65,000 down. That money is now equity. It is not accessible without a sale or a loan against the home. And according to NYU Stern's 2023 market return database, $65,000 invested in a total market index fund at the historical 10.1% annual return would be worth approximately $173,000 in 10 years. That opportunity cost is real, and it is permanent. Lauren does not get to recalculate it later. The wealth-building power of that $65,000 was spent on the down payment, and the compounding she lost cannot be recovered. This is not an argument that renting is always better. In many markets and over sufficient time horizons, the equity appreciation of homeownership justifies the opportunity cost comfortably. But in the specific scenario where a buyer is house poor, where the monthly cost of ownership has consumed their investing margin, the opportunity cost of the down payment compounds the damage. Not only are they not investing their monthly surplus, they also deployed their largest existing savings into an illiquid asset. Trap 3. Appreciation feels like wealth, but does not spend like wealth. Lauren's home is now worth $358,000, according to her most recent Zillow estimate. She has gained $33,000 in appreciation. On paper, her net worth improved.
But Lauren cannot buy groceries with appreciation. She cannot pay her daughter's tuition with appreciation. She cannot retire with appreciation without selling the house, paying transaction costs of approximately 5 to 6%, paying capital gains taxes above the $250,000 exclusion for single filers per IRS Publication 523, and then finding somewhere else to live. The wealth is real, but it is entirely illiquid, and it comes with frictions that significantly reduce the net capture when it is eventually accessed. Meanwhile, the credit card that absorbed 3 years of maintenance emergencies carries a 22% interest rate, according to the Federal Reserve's 2024 consumer credit data. The appreciation gains are nominal. The credit card interest is compounding against her monthly. The 28-36 rule says your mortgage payment should not exceed 28% of gross income and total debt should not exceed 36%. These are the guardrails most lenders use during underwriting. There are 2 problems with using this rule as your actual affordability benchmark. First, it is calculated against gross income. Lauren's gross income is $7,083 per month. Her take-home is $5,300. The rule calculates her ceiling based on money she never touches. A 28% ceiling on $7,083 is $1,983. Her real housing cost against her actual take-home is $2,469, which is 46.6% of the money she actually has. Gross income-based affordability rules consistently overstate what buyers can genuinely manage because they ignore the 25 to 30% that disappears between earning and spending. Second, the 2836 rule counts only the mortgage payment, not the full cost of ownership. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the lifestyle expansion costs that follow a purchase are not in the calculation. The rule was designed to underwrite a loan. It was not designed to protect your retirement timeline or your emergency fund. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's 2023 mortgage market data, the median debt-to-income ratio at mortgage origination is 38%. The median buyer is already at the edge of the conventional guideline at the moment they close. There is no margin built into the starting position.
Here is the calculation Lauren did not run before she bought. Take your monthly take-home pay, subtract your total housing cost, mortgage, taxes, insurance, and a real maintenance reserve of 1% of home value divided by 12. Whatever is left is your operational budget for everything in your life, including the wealth building that determines whether your 60s are financially free or financially stressed. From that remainder, you need at minimum 15% of gross income directed toward retirement savings, per financial planning research consensus. For Lauren, at $85,000, that is $1,062 per month into retirement vehicles. She is contributing $400. 3 to 6 months of expenses in liquid emergency savings. Lauren has $8,000. At her monthly spend rate, that is approximately 1.4 months. Every financial disruption, and over 30 years of home ownership, there will be several, draws down a buffer that is already inadequate. The gap between what she is doing and what the math requires is not a gap created by frivolous spending. It is a gap created by a housing cost that consumed the margin before any of those other priorities had a chance to compete for it. The honest metric is not what percentage of gross income goes to your mortgage. It is what percentage of take-home pay is available for wealth building after all housing costs are paid. A healthy target is 20% or more. At Lauren's numbers, it is approximately 7%.
Lauren is not a cautionary tale about irresponsibility. She did everything the conventional process asked of her. She saved, she bought below her approval maximum, she put 20% down, she avoided PMI, she checked every box, and she is still house poor, because the process that approved her was designed to assess credit risk, not to protect her retirement, her emergency fund, or the financial margin that separates a secure life from a perpetually stretched one. House poor is not a personal failure. It is a structural outcome of an affordability calculation that measures the wrong number, uses the wrong income figure, and leaves out half the costs. The fix is not complicated, but it requires running the complete math before you sign, rather than discovering it after. Total housing cost, not just the mortgage, against take-home pay, not gross income. Then check what is left against what you actually need to keep building wealth. If that margin is not there, the house is not affordable, not because the bank declined you, because your own future cannot afford it. Subscribe to Wealth Science. Every video runs the complete numbers on the decisions that actually shape your financial life. No agenda, no shortcuts. See you in the next one.